At a glittering charity gala filled with billionaires, a black electrician named Henry was hired to fix an emergency backstage. He only wanted to finish and get home in time for his sick mother's heart medication. But before hundreds of guests, the host turned to his daughter and announced,
"Tonight you will choose a husband worthy of this family."
No one expected the young woman to step down from the stage walk past every wealthy heir and stop in front of the dusty stranger holding a screwdriver.
I choose him.
Why would she see worth where everyone else saw nothing? The morning began, the way every morning began in the small rented house on 63rd Street. The kettle whistled. The radiator clanged twice and gave up. Henry Bell stood at the chipped kitchen counter sorting 4 small white tablets into the blue plastic case his mother kept beside her teacup. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. He had been doing this for 7 years, ever since the cardiologist sent Diana Bell home with a folder thicker than a Bible and a list of medications that cost more than the rent. Diana shuffled into the kitchen in her old slippers, the ones with the worn-down heels she refused to throw out because Henry's father had bought them. She was 65, but the heart condition made her look older on the bad days and almost like herself on the good ones. "You forgot to eat again," she said, not as a question. "I had toast." "There's no crumbs on the plate, Henry." He smiled without turning around. He slid the last piece of bread into a small lunchbox and clicked it shut. The lunchbox would go into her cabinet on the second shelf, where she would find it around noon and pretend to be surprised. "Mama, you sound like a detective." "I sound like a mother who knows when her grown son is lying about breakfast." He kissed the top of her head. Her hair smelled like the lavender shampoo from the dollar store, the one she insisted was just as good as anything fancy. At the door, she caught his sleeve. "You're going to that big party tonight? They called yesterday, some kind of charity gala. The hotel needs a backup electrician on standby in case the system flickers. Easy money." "Easy money," she repeated with the small, skeptical sound she had been making since 1990-something. "Be home by 10. My medicine." "I'll be home by 10. He had never broken that promise, not once. The afternoon took him 3 blocks over to Mrs. Calloway's narrow brick house, where the ceiling fan in her bedroom had been ticking like a metronome for 2 weeks. Mrs. Calloway was 81. She lived on a fixed income that did not stretch to electricians, and Henry had stopped pretending it did. He climbed her stepladder, opened the housing, and found a worn capacitor and a wire that had finally given enough. 20 minutes later, the fan turned smooth and silent above her head. "How much do I owe you, baby?" she asked, already reaching for the coffee can on top of the refrigerator where she kept her emergency money. "Nothing, ma'am. I had the parts in the truck. Don't you lie to an old woman, Henry Bell. I know what those parts cost." She pressed a folded $20 bill into his palm with the strength of a woman who had raised 6 children on a postal worker's salary. He thanked her. He held the bill all the way to her front coat closet, where he slid it into the inside pocket of her good Sunday coat, while she filled a tin with cookies for him. She would find the 20 in October when the weather turned. He had been doing this with her coat for 3 years. On his way back to the truck, he passed Reggie Halsey on the corner. Reggie had been Henry's neighbor since they were both 12, a plumber by trade and a stubborn man by disposition. "You're working that gala tonight." "How do you always know my schedule, man?" "Your mother told my wife, drive careful." Henry laughed and kept walking. By the time he got back to the house, the sun was sliding down behind the row of maples on the corner. Diana was already in the front room watching the news with the volume too loud, the way she did when her hearing aid battery was dying, and she did not want to say so. After dinner, he sat at the kitchen table under the yellow ceiling light and opened his ledger. Rent, power, water, Mama's prescriptions. The number at the bottom did not work. He turned the page. The next page of the ledger was not bills. It was a different kind of book entirely written in his careful block letters. Diana Bell. Daily blood pressure morning and evening. Weight every Sunday. Medications with times and any side effects. 7 years of entries, no skipped days, the handwriting of a man who had taught himself to read a heart monitor because no one else was going to read it for him. On the inside cover of the ledger, taped down at all 4 corners so it would never come loose, was a black and white photograph. A man in a dark blue work shirt, the patch over his pocket reading, "Bell Electric." Beside him, a boy about 10 years old, grinning, holding a coil of copper wire like a trophy. The man was Henry's father. The boy was Henry. His father had died on a Tuesday in 2004. Heart attack on the loading dock at the lumber yard. The ambulance reached St. Vincent's in 11 minutes, which was good. The cardiac wing lost power for 4 minutes during the first attempt at defibrillation, which was not. By the time the backup generator caught up, his father had been gone for 90 seconds. Henry had been 17. He had stood in the hospital hallway and made a promise that no one heard except him. He had been too young to keep it then. 7 years ago, the same year Diana's heart had begun to fail, he had walked back into St. Vincent's with his tool bag. He had asked the head nurse of the cardiac wing, a woman named Janet Whitfield, whether the hospital would mind if he looked at the backup feeds on his own time. She had not asked him why. He had not offered. Since then, the cardiac wing had the most reliable backup electrical system of any hospital in the county, rebuilt one quiet weekend at a time, no invoice, no contract, no name on a plaque. Janet had stopped trying to thank him out loud after the second year. She just left a thermos of coffee on the maintenance bench whenever he came. He closed the ledger and stood up slowly, his back tired in the way that men in his line of work learned to ignore by 35. In the front room, Diana had fallen asleep in her chair, the news still murmuring. He turned the television off, pulled the Afghan up to her shoulders, and stood there for a moment, looking at her face. Smaller than he remembered from his childhood. Softer. He thought about his father and the promise and the 4 minutes. Then he went to get his work boots. The hotel was waiting. The gala would start in 2 hours, and somewhere across town, in a house he had never seen, a young woman he had never met was already putting on a dress she did not want to wear. Across the city, in a stone house with a circular drive, Olivia Hart stood in front of a mirror she did not particularly like. The dress had been chosen for her. The jewelry had been chosen for her. The shoes pinched in a way that suggested someone had measured a different woman. She was 26 years old, and she could not remember the last evening that had belonged to her. Her father's voice carried through the open door of the dressing room. Richard Hart did not raise his voice when he was displeased. He lowered it, and the staff learned to listen harder. Tonight he was running through the guest list with his assistant, the way other men ran through a stock portfolio. The Wexler boy, the Donovan twins, the youngest Pemberton. Each name attached to a square footage of land or a number of beachfront properties or a controlling interest in something Olivia had never asked to inherit. She had asked once 4 years ago if she could open a small studio of her own. She had spread her drawings across her father's desk, the ones for a low-income housing project, the courtyards laid out so that mothers on different floors could see each other's kitchens. Her father had looked at the drawings for less than a minute. Sentiment is not a business plan, Olivia. He had folded them in half and set them aside the way a man sets aside a napkin. She had not opened that folder again, and she had not thrown it away. In the mirror, the woman in the borrowed dress reached up and touched the diamond resting against her collarbone. It was heavier than it looked. The driver came at 7. By the time Henry pulled his work truck up to the service entrance of the Whitestone Hotel, the marble lobby was already full of men in tuxedos, pretending not to count each other. He went in through the back, through the kitchens, past the racks of glassware, and the chefs shouting over a tray of crab claws until he reached the maintenance corridor and the panel he had been called to watch. The hotel's chief engineer, a heavy-set man named Ed Whitcomb, met him at the door with a clipboard. "Glad you could make it on short notice. Whole junction on the north wing's been throwing breakers since lunch. We've got the gala running on the south feed, but if the south feed flickers, the whole ballroom goes dark, and that," Ed said, gesturing toward the muffled string quartet upstairs, "is not the room you want to plunge into darkness tonight." Henry set down his bag. Show me. He worked for the next 90 minutes in a small concrete room behind the kitchens, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, his hands moving over the breaker panel the way other men's hands moved over a piano. Ed left him to it. Henry preferred that. Around 8:30, he stepped out into the service corridor to stretch his back. He needed a minute. The corridor opened onto a small staff terrace that wrapped around the side of the ballroom screened from the gala by a row of potted ficus trees. He went out for the air. That was where he found the older woman. She was sitting on a bench near the railing, one hand pressed flat against her chest, a champagne flute tipped sideways on the stone beside her. The flush in her face was the wrong kind of flush. Henry had seen that flush before on his mother more than once. "Ma'am," he said, crouching at a respectful distance. "Are you all right? I just need a minute, dear. How long has the air felt thin?" She blinked at him as if surprised that anyone had used the right words for it. "About 10 minutes. He moved without fuss. He set the champagne flute upright. He went back into the corridor, returned with a glass of cold water from a station tray, and he took her wrist between two fingers the way Janet Whitfield had taught him to do years ago, the first time he had asked her how to know when his mother was in trouble. "My name is Henry," he said quietly. "I'd like to stay with you for a few minutes, if that's all right. The air will come back." "Sit then." He sat. He did not crowd her. He talked to her about nothing in particular until her color settled, and when her son finally came looking for her, the older woman lifted Henry's hand and squeezed it before she let go. The son tried to press a folded bill into Henry's palm. Henry shook his head. "She's all right. That's enough, sir. I have a mother at home." He went back inside. A young woman in a long, pale dress had been standing at the upper railing of the staff terrace, half hidden by the ficus, watching the whole thing without breathing. Olivia had come out for air herself. She had not expected to find a man in a work shirt sitting beside an old woman on a stone bench, asking her about the air the way a son might ask. She had not expected to feel something settle in her chest that had been crooked for a long time. She watched him walk back toward the kitchens. She did not move from the railing for a long while. Inside the ballroom, 20 minutes later, a young waiter named Cole tipped a tray of red wine down the front of a senator's wife. The maitre d' came at a clip. The boy began to apologize in the broken voice of someone who had already added up what losing this job would cost his family. Henry had stepped through the kitchen door at exactly the wrong moment, a length of wire over one shoulder. He spoke before he thought about it. "My fault," he said loud enough to cut across the maitre d'. "I came through fast and bumped him. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll cover the cleaning." The maitre d' looked from Henry to the boy and back. The senator's wife huffed. The boy's eyes were enormous. Henry did not look at the boy. He was still looking at the maitre d'. "Send the bill to the hotel office. Put it under Bell Electric." The boy stayed employed. Olivia was standing near a tall column of white roses, a glass of water in her hand. She had seen the whole thing. She set the glass down without drinking from it. She found him on the staff terrace a few minutes later, sitting on the low stone ledge, his head tipped back against the wall. "You didn't bump him," she said. He opened his eyes. He looked at her without recognition, only a polite curiosity, the way a working man looks at a guest who has wandered too far from her own party. "No, ma'am," he said. "I didn't." "Then why?" "He's 19, maybe 20. Lives with his grandmother, probably. Sends part of his check home. The lady whose dress he ruined will forget about that stain in a week. Losing this job he wouldn't forget for a year." She sat down on the bench across from him. "You sound like you know him." "I know the type. I was the type." She studied him in the soft yellow light from the corridor. The sleeves of his work shirt were folded above the elbow. There was a small smear of grease on the back of one wrist, half wiped, not entirely. He had not adjusted his posture for her. She was so used to men adjusting their posture for her that the absence of it was the loudest thing in the room. "May I ask you something that isn't my business?" "You can ask." "Why are you wearing all of that jewelry?" He gestured at her collarbone, at the heavy diamond at the bracelets stacked on her wrist that she had been turning around and around without realizing it. She let out a small, surprised sound that was almost a laugh, and not quite. "I have no idea. Your shoulder's been tight since you sat down. Things that heavy are usually somebody else's idea." She looked at him for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Henry. Just Henry. Just Henry is plenty for tonight." "Then I'm just Olivia." She did not say heart. He did not ask. "How do you know so much about light, Henry?" She gestured vaguely at the corridor behind them, the wiring he had been working on, the whole quiet machinery of a building he understood, and she did not. "My father taught me. He used to say lights were the only thing a man could trust because they don't lie when they go out. You always know exactly what they're telling you." That sounds like a man who'd been lied to. He'd been lied to plenty. She laughed at that softly, and then she stopped laughing because she realized she had not laughed in months, and the sound of it surprised her more than him. "I wanted to design houses once," she said almost without meaning to. "Small ones. The kind that people who don't have a lot can actually live in. Someone in my family decided that wasn't a good use of my time. Then someone cost the city a lot of better houses." The line landed somewhere she had not been expecting it to land. She looked down at her hands. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the time, and stood without ceremony. "I have to go in a few minutes. My mother takes her medication at 10. I told her I'd be home." "Of course." He picked up his work bag from where he had set it beside the bench. Then he looked back at her the way a man looks at something he is not sure he will see again. "Whatever you came out here to decide, Olivia, decide it for yourself. Don't let a heavy diamond do it for you." He went. She stayed on the terrace for another full minute, both hands flat against the stone railing, breathing in a way she had not breathed all evening. Inside the ballroom, the string quartet had stopped. A spotlight was cutting across the dance floor toward the small raised platform where her father stood with a microphone, smiling the smile he used when he was about to announce a transaction. Olivia did not know yet what he was going to say. She had a feeling about it that began low in her stomach and rose slowly into her throat. She walked back inside. Her father raised the microphone. The room hushed the way only a room full of people who owe each other money can hush. "Friends," Richard Hart said, "tonight is a special night for our family. My daughter, as many of you know, has reached an age at which a woman of her standing must consider her future. Tonight, before all of you, Olivia will choose the man she intends to build that future with." There was a low ripple through the crowd, half amusement, half hunger. Olivia's hand closed slowly around the stem of a glass she had picked up without meaning to. The young men on the floor adjusted their shoulders. The Wexler boy, the Donovan twins, the youngest Pemberton. Each one of them turning toward her with the same expression she had been seeing all her life, the expression of a man who has been told he is owed something. Across the room, near the service door, a tall figure in a work shirt had just lifted his bag onto his shoulder, ready to walk out the back the way he had come in. Olivia set the glass down. She stepped down from the platform. She walked past the Wexler boy without looking at him. She walked past the Donovan twins. She walked past the youngest Pemberton, who actually opened his mouth to say her name. She kept walking. The room watched her go 300 faces, none of them understanding yet. She stopped in front of Henry. He was already half-turned toward the door. He looked at her with the same uncomprehending kindness he had on the terrace, except now there was a quiet alarm rising behind it because he had begun finally to count the silence in the room. "I choose him," Olivia said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The silence broke into a kind of frozen sound, the sound of 300 people inhaling at once. Henry's face went very still. He looked from her to the platform, to the man with the microphone, to the platform again. The pieces arranged themselves behind his eyes, and Olivia watched them arrange. "Ma'am," he said, quiet, careful, "I don't think you know what you're doing." I do. I don't belong here. I know. He lowered his eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought he might say something else. Then he shook his head gently, the way a man shakes his head at a kindness he cannot afford to accept. "Excuse me," he said. He stepped past her, past the silence, past the cameras that had begun somewhere in the back of the room to lift. He pushed the service door open with one shoulder and was gone. Olivia stood alone in the middle of 300 people. She did not cry. She did not run after him. She stood in the place she had stopped, and for the first time in her 26 years on this earth, she felt something that was not the weight of the diamond around her neck. She felt free. Henry drove home that night the way he had driven home 1,000 other nights, his hand resting on the worn knob of the gear shift, the radio on a low jazz station that had been playing the same 8 records since 1996. He did not yet know what had been said in the ballroom after he left. He did not know that someone in the back of the room had lifted a phone, that the cameras had found their angle, that by the time he turned onto his own street, the clip was already moving across the country. He only knew that the dashboard clock said 9:51, and that he was going to make it home in time to give his mother her pills. Diana was awake when he came in. She did not ask him about the gala. She took her medication and let him kiss the top of her head, and that was all. He slept hard. He did not dream. By the time he woke up the next morning, the world had already decided what kind of man he was. Diana was the one who saw it first. She had reached for the kitchen radio out of habit and caught a host laughing about it, the words gold digger and opportunist slipping past the morning weather report as if they belonged in the same sentence. She turned the radio off so quickly she almost knocked it from the shelf. She did not tell Henry. She made his coffee. She watched him drink half of it before his phone began to ring and ring and ring, and finally she said very quietly, "Don't answer that, baby." By the time he found out the rest, his face on 3 news sites under 3 different unflattering headlines, a stranger had already been parked across the street for an hour with a long-lens camera. Hundreds of comments under each video, men he had never met, who knew exactly what kind of man he was. His childhood block in 2 grainy photos, Bell Electric in small letters on the side of his truck. Reggie came out of his own house in his slippers at one point and stood at the edge of the sidewalk asking the photographer if his mother knew what kind of work he was doing for a living. The photographer pretended not to hear him. Reggie went back inside and came out with a folding chair, set it up on his own porch facing the street, and sat there reading a paperback in a way that made it clear whatever waiting game the photographer had come to play, Reggie was prepared to play longer. Henry walked into the back room of the house. Diana was sitting on the edge of her bed with the door closed, both hands folded in her lap. She had been crying. She had wiped it carefully the way she wiped everything, but he had been her son for 39 years, and he could read her face in the dark. He sat down next to her. "Mama, I didn't do anything wrong. I know you didn't. They're going to keep saying I did." She looked at the window. She looked back at her hands. "What I hate, Henry, is the sound of you about to apologize for being poor. Don't ever apologize for that. Not in this house." He did not trust his voice for a few seconds, so he did not use it. He took his mother's hand instead, and they sat that way until the photographer across the street finally gave up and drove away. That afternoon, Olivia came to the door. She had not been allowed to leave the house. Her father had taken away the credit cards he had given her for her 21st birthday and instructed the staff that she was not to be inconvenienced by going out tonight, which was the polite Hart family word for locked in. She had walked out anyway with cash she had been saving in a book on her shelf for a project that had never been allowed to begin. When Henry opened the door and saw her standing on his porch in plain jeans and a gray sweater, he did not say anything for a beat too long. "You shouldn't be here, Olivia." "I know. You're going to make it worse. It is already worse. I just wanted you to hear an apology that wasn't on a screen." He stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door mostly closed behind him so his mother would not have to overhear what was about to be said about her son. "You don't owe me an apology. I dragged you into this. You didn't drag me into anything. You just showed me how cold the room you grew up in really is." She looked at him the way a person looks at the first true thing she has heard in a long time. "Take a walk with me," she said. He almost said no. He looked back at the house at the curtain, where his mother had not quite stopped watching them, and what he saw on his mother's face was not worry. It was something gentler than that, and harder to refuse. He took the walk. He took her 4 blocks over to a low brick row of apartments with peeling paint and a courtyard full of weeds. He pointed at the second-floor windows. This building was condemned 2 years ago. Bad wiring, bad plumbing, bad everything. The owner was going to tear it down and put up a parking lot. A few of us in the neighborhood spent 11 weekends running the wiring back ourselves. We didn't get paid. Nobody was going to pay us. 8 families live here now who would otherwise be in a shelter. She looked up at the windows. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you said last night you wanted to design houses for people who don't have a lot. I'm showing you what those houses actually look like before somebody like you ever gets a chance to draw them better. I'm not showing you because I want anything from you, Olivia. I'm showing you because you should see them." She stood for a long time looking up at the second-floor windows, where a woman in a yellow house dress was watering a single tomato plant in a coffee can. "You don't need me," Olivia said. "No, ma'am, I don't." "That is exactly why I want to stay." He looked at her then. He did not answer. He did not need to. He walked her back to the corner where the cab waited. Before she got in, she tore a strip from the back of a receipt in her coat pocket and wrote a phone number on it. She pressed it into his palm. "Just in case," she said. He folded the strip very small and slid it into the pocket of his shirt where he kept the only other piece of paper he carried, the photograph of his father. The cab door closed. The cab pulled away. Henry stood on the corner for another minute watching it go, and for the first time since he had woken up that morning, the weight on his chest shifted. He thought it would lighten then. It did not. It got worse. 8 days later, Diana woke him at 3 in the morning with the wrong kind of breathing. He had heard that breathing twice before in his life, and he had hoped he would never hear it again. He moved without thinking. He dialed the ambulance. He pulled the small bag from the closet that he had packed months ago for exactly this. He sat on the edge of his mother's bed holding her hand and counting her pulse with the other, and his fingers did not shake until later when there was time for shaking. Before they left, he gave Janet Whitfield Olivia's number over the phone in case the night went the way nights like this could go. St. Vincent's was full. 2 ambulances ahead of them, no beds in the cardiac wing. The intake nurse said the words, "We'll do our best," in the tone that meant we are not sure that will be enough, and Henry felt the old hospital hallway rising up around him, the one from 2004, the one where he had been 17 years old. Olivia came into the emergency lobby with her coat half on and a folded gray cardigan in her arms, the kind of cardigan a person has been knitting in private for someone she has not yet been allowed to meet. Janet had called her at 2:46 that morning. She walked straight to Henry. "Mercy West has an open cardiac bed. I called. They're holding it. There's a private ambulance outside." "Olivia, I can't pay for... It's already paid for. Put your mother in the ambulance, Henry." He looked at her for one long second. Then he put his mother in the ambulance. Mercy West was warmer and quieter than St. Vincent's, the kind of place that smelled like lemon instead of bleach. The cardiologist on call spoke to Henry for 15 unhurried minutes. By 2 in the morning, Diana was stable, sleeping shallowly, under a thin white blanket, a monitor making the small, soft beep that means still here. Henry sat in the chair beside the bed. He took out his ledger. He began without thinking to write down the time of the last medication, the last blood pressure, reading the way she had described the tightness before it began. Olivia watched him from the doorway for a long while before she stepped inside. "You write that down every time?" "Every time. For 7 years, almost 8. She came and sat on the other side of the bed. She did not try to take Diana's hand. She just sat. After a while, Henry dozed in the chair, his head tipped back against the wall, the ledger open in his lap, his hand still resting on his mother's wrist where he had been counting her pulse. Diana opened her eyes around 4 in the morning. She did not turn her head. She looked at the ceiling for a while, and then she looked at Olivia. "You're the girl from the gala." "Yes, ma'am." "He doesn't know you're here yet." "He's been asleep about 20 minutes. Diana smiled, the very small smile of a woman who had raised a son and could read a man's exhaustion like a weather report. Then she turned her head slowly and looked at Olivia properly. "I'm going to tell you something, sweetheart, and then I'm going to go back to sleep because the medication wants me to. Will you listen?" "Yes." "Rich people, in my experience, are afraid of losing their money. Poor people are afraid of losing their dignity. Henry has never in his 39 years made me ashamed of being his mother. There was a winter we ran out of food in the second week of February. He took half of what was left on his plate and put it outside the back door for a stray dog, and when I told him we couldn't spare it, he said, 'Mama, it's hungrier than us.' He was 8 years old. She breathed for a minute. The monitor beeped its small, soft beep. 'You don't have to give him money, child. He has never wanted that from anyone. What he has never had in his whole life is somebody telling him that he is enough already, just as he is, with the work boots and the empty plate and all of it. If you want to do something for my son, that's the thing you can do. Nobody else has been able to.'" Olivia did not answer right away. She could not. She lifted Diana's hand finally and held it carefully, and Diana let her, and after a while Diana closed her eyes again. When Henry woke at 6, Olivia was still in the chair on the far side of the bed. She did not tell him what his mother had said. She would never tell him. She would only carry it all the rest of her life like a small lit thing under her coat. Across town at 6:15 that same morning, Richard Hart was already on the phone. He had been awake since 4, since he had received the photograph from his security detail of his daughter sliding into the back of a private ambulance with a black electrician's mother on a stretcher, and he had been awake since he had calculated how much that one photograph would cost his family if it ever reached a magazine. By 8 in the morning, he had called every general contractor in the city who had ever taken a Hart Properties contract. By the end of the day, he had called the rest. He did not threaten anyone. He did not need to. He simply mentioned that he was reviewing his vendor list and that certain associations made certain arrangements complicated, and the contractors who all understood the language hung up and crossed Bell Electric off their roster of approved subs. Within a week, Henry's phone had gone silent in a way he had not heard since the year his father died. He told no one at first. He picked up 2 small repair jobs from old neighborhood clients who had not heard or did not care. He worked them slowly, carefully, the way a man works when he is trying not to think. On the 8th day, he drove downtown. The Hart Properties building was 42 stories of glass. He gave his name at the front desk. He did not expect to get past it. The receptionist made a phone call, listened, made another, listened again, and then, with a strange lift of her eyebrows, she handed him a visitor's badge. Richard Hart had agreed to see him. Richard Hart wanted to see him. The office was on the 38th floor. The window behind the desk was the size of a wall. Richard did not stand when Henry came in. Henry did not sit. "You wanted to see my face," Henry said. "Here it is." "I wanted to see what kind of man would walk into this building uninvited." "I was invited. Your secretary just did it twice." Something in Richard's eye moved that had not moved in a long time. He gestured at the chair across the desk. Henry did not take it. "I don't know what your daughter wants, Mr. Hart. I'm not going to pretend I do, but I know what you're doing. You're punishing a man who has nothing to do with you because you can't control somebody who does. That isn't a father's love. That's a man's fear with a checkbook taped to it. I'm protecting my family. From me, I haven't called her once in 8 days. I haven't asked her for $1. I haven't asked her for an introduction. The only thing I've done is fail to disappear fast enough for your taste. You think you understand my family? No, sir. I understand mine. My mother is in a hospital bed right now because of stress that started the morning your friends decided what kind of man I was. And the man who started that sitting behind that desk has the nerve to tell me he's doing it out of love. Henry rested his knuckles on the edge of the desk very lightly. You want to ask me a question, Mr. Hart? Ask me this one. When was the last time you sat next to your daughter when she was sick? Not your assistant. You. You hold her wrist, count her pulse, write it down. When was the last time? Richard did not answer. That's what I thought. He left the office. He did not slam the door. The receptionist looked up as he passed. He gave her back the visitor badge and thanked her for the trouble, and he meant it because she had not done anything wrong. In the elevator going down, he caught his reflection in the polished steel door. He did not recognize the man looking back. The man looking back was not afraid anymore. He was tired, but he was not afraid. He did not yet know what was coming next. The next thing came 2 nights later. The cardiologist at Mercy West asked Henry to come in alone before Diana's follow-up appointment. He sat across from Henry in a small consulting room with a folder open between them and spoke in the careful, level voice that doctors use when they are about to say something a man cannot fix with his hands. Your mother's heart is stable for now, but the stress markers we're seeing, the cortisol, the blood pressure pattern, those numbers are not coming from her cardiac condition. They're coming from outside her body, from whatever is happening in her life. If those numbers do not come down, we are looking at another event. A larger one. Henry thanked the cardiologist. He drove home. He sat in the truck in front of his own house for 20 minutes before he could go inside. That night, after Diana was asleep, he opened the closet and took out the duffel bag he had bought for her hospital trips and began slowly to fill it with his own clothes. He had a cousin in a small town 3 hours north. Quiet place. Nobody knew his name there. He could find work as a maintenance man at a school. The numbers would come down. She would live. He would lose Olivia. He had already lost her in the only way that mattered. There was no version of his life in which he could keep her without his mother paying for it in heartbeats. The doorbell rang at 11:30. He opened the door without checking. Olivia was standing on the porch in a long coat she had been wearing too often, and in her hand was a folded sheet of paper. I went into my father's office, she said. I wasn't supposed to. I don't care anymore. She held the paper out. He took it. It was a single page on Hart Properties letterhead, signed at the bottom by Richard. It was addressed to a member of the Board of Trustees of Mercy West Hospital, on whose foundation board Richard sat. It politely requested that the trustee reprioritize the cardiology specialty list such that patients with closer institutional ties to the foundation receive scheduling preference. The follow-up appointment that the cardiologist had scheduled for Diana, the one that was supposed to be next week, had been moved to first available, which on Mercy West's specialty wing meant a wait of 14 weeks. Henry had assumed it was a clerical mistake. He read the letter twice. He read it a third time. He folded it very carefully along the same crease his father had used to fold layoff notices in the 80s. He did not yell. He did not throw it. He looked up at Olivia and said the thing he could not have said to anyone else on earth. If I stay, my mother dies of stress. If I leave, your father wins. Which one do you want me to choose, Olivia? She did not have an answer. She knew she did not. Her eyes were wet, but she did not let them spill because she had decided on the cab ride over that she would not make him carry her crying on top of everything else. I don't know, she said. I came here because I needed you to know it wasn't just bad luck. It was him. I only know that the man who did this is not my father anymore. Not in the way that word is supposed to mean. He stepped out onto the porch. He pulled the door closed behind him. They sat down on the top step together, not touching the way two people sit who have both lost the same thing on the same night. The street lamp at the end of the block was flickering. It had been flickering for 2 weeks. He had told himself a dozen times he would walk down there with a ladder and fix it. That lamp's broken, he said. I know. I don't have the strength to fix it tonight. I know. They sat on the step until the lamp finally gave up and went dark altogether, and even after that, neither of them moved for a long time. Olivia did not go home that night. She sat on Henry's porch step until the street lamps on the next block flickered against the dawn, and by the time the sky was gray, she had decided what she was going to do. She walked through the front door of her father's house in the same coat she had been wearing for 3 days. He was at the breakfast table, the morning paper beside a half-eaten grapefruit. "Olivia, sit down." "I'm not staying." She set the folded letter from his desk on the table beside his grapefruit. He recognized it the way a man recognizes his own handwriting. He did not reach for it. "You always told me that money was how a family kept itself safe. And the only person in this story who has actually kept his family safe is the man you tried to bury with a phone call. He sits next to his mother every night. He writes down her pulse. He has never not once asked anyone to admire him for it." Richard set down his fork. "I was 13 when you missed my school play. You said your secretary had it on the calendar wrong. Dad, your secretary, had it on the calendar right. I checked. I never told you because I thought it would hurt you. Where were you when Mom left? Where were you when I graduated? Where were you any time in my life I was actually sick? I'm not asking for an answer. I'm telling you so that you hear it out loud in your own house from your own daughter. From tonight, Dad, I am not waiting for you anymore." She walked out of the dining room. She walked out of the house. She did not look back, because she was afraid that if she did, the small girl inside her who still wanted to be loved by her father would soften, and she could not afford to soften today. Richard sat at the table for a long time. He looked at some point at the wall opposite where there hung a photograph of his own mother, taken the year before she had died, because the small clinic in his old neighborhood could not afford to keep her on the medication she needed. He had built half a city against that memory and forgotten what he had been building against. When was the last time you sat next to your daughter when she was sick? He still did not have an answer. That same morning, Reggie knocked on Henry's door and came in without waiting the way he always did. He set a thick manila folder on the kitchen table. 231 signatures. Everybody on this block, half the next one, all the deacons over at Bethel and Mrs. Calloway, who told me to tell you she also wants her $20 back the next time you pull that trick with her coat. Brother, you are not leaving this town. You spent 7 years saving people you didn't tell anybody you were saving. Let people save you for 1 week. The first signature was Janet Whitfield's. Below it, in her careful hospital handwriting, "I'm not asking your permission, Henry. I'm telling you what I'm about to do." Janet held her press conference at noon the next day in the staff lobby of the cardiac wing of St. Vincent's. For 7 years, she told the cameras an electrician named Henry Bell had quietly kept that wing running at the standard of a private one, without a contract, without a name on a wall, because his own father had died there in a power outage when he was 17, and he had decided no other family was going to lose someone the way he had. The labor value by her records came to roughly $58,000 a year. Mrs. Calloway sat for an interview on her porch swing. Cole, the young waiter from the gala, called a reporter just to say what kind of man had taken the blame for a wine stain. Within 48 hours, the same news shows that had laughed at Henry the morning after the gala were running long, careful segments about him with a different word in the lower third graphic. Just his name. Richard watched the coverage in his office with the door closed and the lights off. Around midnight, he turned off his phone for the first time in 17 years. He drove himself across town the next afternoon. Diana opened the door in her housecoat. She knew exactly who he was. "Mr. Hart?" "Mrs. Bell, I was hoping to speak to your son. He's in the back. Come in. I'll put on water for tea." She sat him in the good chair by the window, the way she would have for anyone, and Richard sat in that chair, feeling the strangest thing he had felt in 30 years, which was that he was being treated like a person and not like a checkbook. The wall above the small couch was covered end to end in greeting cards. "Thank you for fixing the heater, Mr. Bell. Thank you for keeping the porch light on. We prayed for your mother last Sunday. No plaques, no framed checks, just the photograph from the inside cover of Henry's ledger blown up and hung on the wall of a man in a blue work shirt and a small boy with a coil of copper wire. Henry came in from the back. He did not sit. Richard stood up. "I came to offer to pay for your mother's treatment." "No, my mother's treatment is paid for. The hospital agreed to a payment plan after the news this week. Money was never the thing missing from this room." Richard looked down at his hands. They were shaking very faintly. "What can I do?" "You can leave my house and learn how to be Olivia's father. Start with her birthday. Don't look at your phone, just say it. If you can't, that's where you start." Richard opened his mouth. He closed it. He did not know the date. He thanked Diana for the tea he had not actually drunk. He sat behind the wheel of his car for a few minutes in front of the small house, with the cards on the wall. What he felt was not humiliation. It was something nearer to relief. He scrolled back through his phone until he found in an old archived calendar the day his daughter had been born. June 14th, 1999. He wrote it on a piece of paper and put the paper in his wallet. It was a place to start. A year passed. Henry did not become a billionaire. He stayed an electrician, kept the same truck, kept the same tool bag with his father's name on the side. He moved Diana into a slightly bigger rental with a south-facing window for the tomato plant she had wanted for 20 years, and one extra room with good northern light, because Olivia had asked very shyly if she might set up a drafting table somewhere she could work. Olivia left Hart Properties. She opened a small studio above a bakery and called it Bellhart Design. She designed 3 small low-income housing projects in the first year, none of them famous, all of them lived in. She and Henry did not rush. They were learning what it was to love someone without a deadline. On a Sunday in early October, the 4 of them sat down to dinner in the small house with the southern window. Diana was at the head of the table in the cardigan. Olivia had finally finished knitting the pale gray one that had been folded in her lap on the worst night of her life. Henry brought out the roast. Olivia poured the water. The doorbell rang. Richard stood on the porch holding a bottle of $9 wine from the corner store, the price tag still half stuck to the bottom. He had not figured out how to remove it without ripping the label. He looked for the first time in his life like a man unsure whether he was welcome at a door. Olivia opened it. She stepped aside and let him in. He sat down at the table. Henry poured him a glass of water without asking. Diana asked him whether he liked his roast medium or well done, and Richard answered honestly that he had never paid attention to which one he liked, and Diana laughed in a way that made him laugh, too surprised by his own sound. Halfway through dinner, Olivia reached over and took her father's hand. He did not squeeze it right away because he was afraid that if he did, he would cry at the table. Then he did squeeze it, and he did not cry at the table, and that was enough. After the plates were cleared, Henry stepped out onto the porch for some air. The street lamp at the end of the block was on. It had been on for 6 months now. He had walked down there with a ladder finally on a quiet Saturday in March, and he had fixed it himself the way his father had once taught him, one wire at a time. Inside, he could hear his mother laughing at something Olivia had said, and Richard awkwardly asking if he could help dry the dishes. Lights are the only thing a man can trust, his father had told him, because they don't lie when they go out. He had believed that for most of his life. He believed something a little different now. He had learned the hard winter of the year he had almost left that there were people who could sit with you in the dark after every light in the room had failed and still see you. That was a kind of light no wire could carry. That was the light that had finally been enough. He went back inside, and through the front window of the small house, with the cards on the wall, 4 people sat down for the second half of dinner. Outside on 63rd Street, the lamp at the corner held steady. If you've stayed with Henry and Diana all the way to the end of this story, thank you. There's a reason a story like this is worth telling out loud. Somewhere out there right now, there is a man fixing a street lamp nobody asked him to fix. There is a son sitting next to his mother's bed, writing down her pulse, hoping the numbers come back the right way. They do not make headlines, but they are the reason the lights in our cities stay on at all. If this story brought somebody to mind for you, a parent, a neighbor, a stranger who once paid for your groceries and walked away before you could thank them, leave their name in the comments. That is the part of this channel I look forward to most every week, reading the names of people the rest of the world never put on a stage. And if you'd like more stories like this one where the right person finally gets seen, the subscribe button is right there. It helps a small channel reach the next listener who needs to hear that being a good man quietly is enough. Until next time, keep a light on for somebody. You never know who is looking up at it from across the street.